I was now officially out of a job, so I signed on the dole on the 21st of March 1994. I did a few computer jobs for friends for a couple of weeks, and then saw an advert in the Surrey Advertiser for a computer-based training development officer with Surrey Police, so I applied. A couple of weeks later I received a reply asking me to come in for an interview on the 18th of April, and I was asked to bring a presentation. I still have it somewhere. I duly arrived for the interview, taking my own computer just in case. I'd had about 4 by then and were a far cry from my first Amstrad, and set it all up in what was then the basement classroom. There were 3 police officers present on the panel: Inspector Brian Russell, who was then head of the training department, Sergeant Steve Wood and PC Ian Parrott. They all sat there with their arms crossed and asked me to begin, and to be honest it was quite easy for me as I'd learnt my presentation skills at Watford. I think that I realised that I had secured the job when a humorous level-headed slide came on and I saw them all smile. A few days later I was told officially that my interview had been successful, and I started work at the Surrey Police Headquarters at Mount Brown on the 16th of May. It was strange to start with, working with lots of policemen, but I think that my age was an advantage. Everyone I met thought that I was a retired police officer, and I seemed to be accepted by everyone. I met Dennis Turner in the canteen one day, and we didn't realise it until we started chatting that we had led parallel lives. Dennis had started work as an engine cleaner at Weymouth in 1960, just before I started my career as an engine cleaner at Guildford in 1961. He'd graduated to become a fireman, as I had, and then, after steam ended in 1967, moved to Dorking EMU depot in 1969 to obtain his driving job, as I moved to Effingham Junction EMU depot in 1973. We didn't realise it then, but we probably saw each other at various places during our initial driving career, and probably had our PN break at Waterloo Drivers' Room at the same time on a number of occasions. Dennis's interest waned a little, being only on a juice-only depot, and as it was no longer the job that he had joined as a boy, he decided to change careers, as I did later, following privatisation in 1994, and he joined Surrey Police, firstly as a probationer, and finally ending up as manager of No. 5 Police Dog Training School at Headquarters Guildford. After Dennis retired, he moved to France, and some years later, following my retirement from South West Trains, I asked him if he'd like to relay his tales in a book that I was writing called Further Ramblings of Railwaymen, which I'm glad he agreed to. His contribution to the book is a fascinating insight to being a fireman at Weymouth before steam ended in 1967, and although the book is no longer available, his photographs and tales can be found by visiting David Hayes' collection website, and the link is shown here. It can also be found on the United Kingdom Web Archive. A couple of weeks went by, and the IT, Information Technology Department, was in need of a trainer to deliver courses to all police officers and civilian staff on their new network computer system. I was chosen for the job and hired out to the IT department for a year. It meant that I'd have to go to Reading for a couple of weeks to be trained, and then to start with I would have to begin training staff in a classroom environment at headquarters Mount Brown. I'd already booked our holiday to Samos in June, so they had to wait for me to get back, but it meant taking homework on holiday yet again. Once back from leave, I went over to DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation at Reading, to be trained, which was quite enjoyable. I then sat in on a SPINE, Surrey Police Integrated Network Environment course, run by DEC, at Mount Brown, and then I was all on my own. My boss, Inspector Brian Russell, was very pleased with my progress, and I had some very good feedback, including comments from superintendents who thought it was a refreshing change to be trained professionally. After a spell at headquarters, I then had to move all of the training equipment to Reigate and start on the eastern part of the county. By Christmas, I was joined by another trainer, and after a few months it was decided to train the rest of the staff utilising a CBT, computer-based training package. Ian Parrott and I started programming the package, and I'm very grateful to Ian for teaching me so much and having the patience to work with me for the following 6 months. We had great fun though, and the package turned out to be quite a success. On Sunday the 22nd of January 1995, Ian Parrott and I went to see the A4 Pacific 60009 Union of South Africa at Woking. It was heading a special charter running from London Waterloo, Staines, Woking, Basingstoke, Salisbury, Romsey, Southampton Central, Basingstoke, Woking and returned to London Waterloo. As I'd parked my car in Woking Down Yard, I also gave Ian a guided tour on a Class 33 Crompton that was berthed there. In March 1995, Woking Borough Council ran a number of steam-hauled services to mark the town's centenary. On Friday the 24th of March, an early morning commuter special, the Woking Centenarian, ran from Woking to Waterloo and my good friend Pat Kinsella was the driver. The locomotive booked to haul the train was rebuilt Merchant Navy Class 35028 Clan Line, and I went up to Woking early in the morning to see the train depart. Other steam-hauled trips that day included M7 Class 30053 working special shuttle trips to Guildford and Aldershot and return to Woking. On Sunday the 25th of March 1995, my pal David Timothy and myself and our wives went to Woking to catch a glimpse of the Woking Centenary celebrations. Class M7 Tank 30053 was running shuttle services from Woking to Woking via Guildford and Aldershot, so after seeing the train in the platform, we decided to go to Twin Bridges by Woking Junction to get a better view. Woking drivers Albert Wright and Alex McMcClymont were the crew accompanied by DSM driver standards manager Jim Granger, who had also been a driver at Woking whilst I was there. It was a splendid sight and brought back very happy memories of my days on the footplate. In this photograph, DSM Jim Granger gives a cheery wave as driver Albert Wright opens the regulator of M7 Class 30053 as they leave Woking. For those of you that have read my first book, The Ramblings of a Railwayman, Jim was the fireman on my memorable trip from Guildford Yard to Reading Yard and return when I was a 15-year-old engine cleaner. The following photograph shows it's Alex McClymont's turn to do the driving as the train runs into Woking on the return journey from Aldershot. By this time, another computer-based trainer had joined our team. She was very ambitious and had an uncanny knack of rubbing everyone up the wrong way. Her ambition was to run the department. The training school at Mount Brown was going through a really tough period at that time and a new man had been drafted in to run it. He was Lieutenant Colonel Tony Kennett OBE, who had previously been in charge of training at Sandhurst. I got on very well with him. However, the other trainer was beginning to really annoy me with her way she was operating and I told my boss about it. He said to me that his hands were tied and that she'd been promised a manager's job by his predecessors and couldn't renege from the issue. So I decided to look for an opening back into training within the railway industry. Michael Gill, one of my fellow trainers at the OTC Waterloo, had started his own company, South Coast Training, and was on the lookout for people like myself. He came to see me one day at Mount Brown and convinced me that I'd be doing the right thing if I worked for him. I must admit, the thought of only working 2 to 3 days a week for the same money as I was getting was enough to swing it. I handed in my notice, much to everyone's surprise, and left the following week, taking my leave as part of the month's notice. I was now working 2 to 3 days a week for Mike Gill's South Coast Training Company as a consultant providing cab secure radio training at Waterloo to signallers from different areas. Dave Webb had also left the railway by this time and came to work with me, and it was just like old times. In the end though, the training did get a bit monotonous. I still kept in touch with Ian Parrott back at Surrey Police and found out that PC Merv Young had been tasked with assessing control room staff on the Crime Information System, CIS, and the Police National Computer, PNC. They must have said something to Tony Kennett that I'd been a bit bored recently, because he phoned me on Friday the 13th of March asking if I would like to do some consultancy work for him back at Surrey Police. Luckily, I had nothing planned that day, as he wanted me to liaise with Merv that afternoon at Addlestone. The following Monday, I was back at Mount Brown for 10 days, and the strange thing was that most people I met didn't even realise I'd gone. I still kept my same force identification number, Finn, and I was even able to log on to all my own work that was still there after 6 months. My first contract was for 3 months, and it was at this time that Tony Kennett told me that he'd felt very guilty about my previous exit and had pulled out all the stops to get me back. Anyway, I was back and enjoying every minute of it. Mike Gill is also very understanding, and it was at this time I decided to further my education and enrolled on an evening City and Guilds course at Mike's SCT venue at Petersfield. I was duly awarded the City and Guilds NVQ D32 qualification that I knew would help me later. After my 3 months contract was up, and it was renewed again, but this time it had become evident that the whole force needed updating on the CIS system. Malcolm Shuttleworth had taken over from Tony Kennett by this time, and he desperately wanted me as a full-time employee. The job that I was doing on a contract came up, and I was advised to apply for it. Following my interview, I found that I'd got the job and was back in full-time employment with Surrey Police, although my base was now going to be at Addlestone. Later on that year, it was also decided to expand the department, and I was joined by 3 police officers, Pete Godfrey being one of them. I'd also carved a niche for myself at work with my computer skills, and Malcolm put me in charge of quite a few projects. I designed and maintained the Human Resources HR website and had complete control over the recertification process. This I did at home and gave me an extra day off a month. Another couple of trainers had now joined me and our department was really taking off. 1st of January 2000. The computers and clocks around the country didn't go berserk as predicted, and the start of the year 2000 was much like any other year. In our spare time, Ian Parrott and I had been working on a CBT rules package for train drivers in the hope of selling it to South West Trains, and we both went to a meeting at Basingstoke to meet Jim Rowe, who was the training manager there. He was quite impressed with the multiple choice graphics package, and I was given the opportunity to have a further meeting with one of the SWT directors at Friarsbridge Court, who was also suitably impressed. However, there had been 2 serious train crashes within the last 2 years, one at Southall and one at Ladbroke Grove, which could have been prevented with the introduction of ATP, automatic train protection, and because of this, all driver training was going through a strict overhaul. Unfortunately, this meant that our effort to become future CBT programmers for SWT was in vain. At work, I've been given the job of designing and creating an HR intranet with a who's who element containing photographs of everyone within the HR department. This kept me pretty busy, as I also had to take photographs of all of the staff. I'd also been given the job of being the official photographer at all of the Surrey Police awards and ceremonies, plus the special constabulary attestations. I was chatting to Ian Parrott one morning about training techniques regarding accident prevention, and mentioned that the best examples to give students were incidents that actually happened. One of these was regarding a train crash at Guildford in 1952, and I'd used this example in the classroom a number of times when working at the OTC Southside. The incident happened at Guildford involving a 2-bill EMU in a collision with a 700 class locomotive adjacent to Guildford Yard signal box on the evening of Saturday the 8th of November 1952. The collision was caused by an Ascot Guildford service consisting of a 2-bill EMU that had left Womburgh station, its last station stop, and once over the top of the bank at Pink's Hill, ran down the descent to Guildford with insufficient air for the brakes to function properly. Unable to stop at the outer home and home signal protecting the line ahead, the 2-bill EMU collided with the light engine that was just leaving Guildford for Woking, the impact of the force pushing it back some 30 yards. There were 65 passengers on the train. Sadly, the driver of the EMU and one passenger were killed, and a further 37 passengers were hurt or suffered shock, 6 of whom were detained in hospital. The driver and fireman on the light engine were also slightly injured. Ian recalled the incident as his father was the last person to see the driver before the fatal crash, as he'd been the porter signalman on duty at Wanborough Station that night. The cause of the accident was blamed on a compressor failure, the compressor governor fuse rupturing probably before it left Ascot as a 2-car unit. The driver was completely unaware that by the time the train reached Guildford, there was little or no air left in the main reservoir or auxiliary reservoirs for the brakes to function. One can only imagine the horror of what must have gone through the driver's mind after he had unsuccessfully tried to apply the brake as the train descended the 1 in 100 bank at a speed of 50 to 55 miles an hour and then struck a locomotive coming the other way. Following the outcome of the inquiry, a control circuit governor (CCG) modification had to be fitted to this type of stock, so designed to ensure there was sufficient air in the brake pipe for brakes to be operative before a train could be moved in a forward direction, and would also cut off power should the pressure fall below safe limits. The provision of this additional safeguard ensured that an accident of this type could never happen again. Guildford driver Bill Phillips looks back for the tip from the guard on 2-bill 2100 at Wokingham with a Reading-bound service in June 1969. Bill doesn't have to look far back as the guard is riding in the brake van directly behind him. The black inverted triangle on a yellow background on the front of a train gives a visual indication to platform staff which end of the train the guard's van is situated. This photo of hybrid 2-car 2133 was taken at Three Bridges on the 25th of May 1970. The motor coach was part of the unit involved in the runaway incident at Guildford on the 8th of November 1952, as previously explained, and returned to traffic in 1955. Ian Verinder, whom I'd worked with at the OTC Southside and was now working as a traction inspector for Eurostar, asked me if I was interested in a cab ride from Waterloo to Paris and return. Naturally, I jumped at the chance. Brian Cook, who had also worked with me at OTC Southside, came with us that day. The trip was to be duly sanctioned by Eurostar and we would be accompanied by Ian throughout. The big day arrived and we both met Ian at Waterloo, who guided us through customs and to the front of the train. As it turned out, the driver who was working the turn was Bernie Nibbs, whom I'd worked with in my firing days at Guildford and in my driving days at Woking, so I couldn't have been in better company. We left Waterloo and just before Queenstown Road branched off the Down Windsor line and over the flyover past Stewart's Lane Depot towards Factory Junction. We then continued down the southeastern main lines towards Tunbridge, Ashford and onwards towards the entrance to the Channel Tunnel. On this part of the journey, the power supplying the traction unit was being supplied by the SR conductor rail system. However, just before we entered the tunnel, the pantograph was raised and our power was then obtained via the overhead catenary wire. This was my first trip under the channel and I was surprised to see how quickly we arrived on French soil. There are no conventional signals on the high-speed line and the maximum speed is 300 kph, 186 miles an hour. The timetable is loaded into the signalling system and if the train is on time, the route will open a short time before the train arrives. If the train is running late, the signaller will have to set the route themselves. The maximum permitted speed for each section of the route are programmed into the system and so the appropriate speed will be automatically displayed to the driver when the route opens. The signaller can close the route if they need to, and whenever this is done, the signalling automatically blocks back. The closer the train is to the stopping point dictates what indication the driver sees. If the train is far enough away, around 7 kilometres, the driver will see a normal stopping sequence, but if the train is within 7 kilometres, the driver will get an abnormal indication. If the train is in the closed section, then the driver will get the famous rouge cabine red indication. After arriving at Paris Gare du Nord station, we went for a bite to eat in a restaurant in the street outside, and then walked to the square Louise Michel below the Basilique Sacré-Cœur, which is famous for its street artists. However, our return journey beckoned, and we left Paris to return to London Waterloo. A truly excellent day out. This photo shows the driver's view from the front of a Eurostar. The paper directly in front of the driver is the fiche train, which is the timing sheet. It shows passing times and stations as you would expect. Interestingly, it also shows a recommended average speed between given points. This can be used if the train is running to time and will ensure the train keeps time without using more electricity than is absolutely necessary. Obviously, the recommended average speed will never be higher than the permissible speed. The sheet also shows coasting points. The folders on the desk are the communication forms that are used between the signaller and driver during out-of-course events. Generally, there is one folder for each network through which the train runs. The notepad is to record information that may be required in a report. The screen with the keyboard is the fault-finding computer. The train speed is just under the maximum permitted speed, 300 kph, as can be seen in this photo. The following year, another trip presented itself, this time from Waterloo to Brussels. On this occasion, I was joined by Ian Parrott, only this time with a different Eurostar driver. Bernie Nibbs, the driver on my previous trip in the cab of the Eurostar to Paris, was on a different duty, and as we headed towards Lille, Bernie approached us in the other direction at a combined speed of over 400 kph. It was another fantastic opportunity for both Ian and I to see France and Belgium from the sharp end of a Eurostar. During my 11 years with Surrey Police, I'd moved around the county training at Banstead, Dorking, Godstone, Guildford, Godalming, Staines, Camberley, Farnham, Woking, Addlestone and headquarters at Mount Brown, and had moved offices 7 times. I'd also had 10 different job titles in that time and was at the limit of my salary band. Unfortunately, I can't divulge most of my work within Surrey Police as I'm bound by the Official Secrets Act, but I can honestly say that I enjoyed the time that I worked there. However, although I enjoyed my job, I still had a passion for railways and still kept in touch with some of my old railway colleagues. One of these was David Timothy, who had been a fellow instructor at the OTC Southside. He'd had a number of jobs within the railway industry and was now working for South West Trains at their training centre at Basingstoke. He asked me if I'd be interested in joining him there, as there was a vacancy for a trainer. The temptation was too great, so I visited the training centre and met Roger Luckins, who was then the operations training manager. I'd also worked with Roger when he was a trainer at the OTC Southside. I was extremely tempted by his offer. The salary was far more than I was receiving from Surrey Police, and it also offered free first-class travel on SWT for myself and my wife. Over the following weekend, I created my CV and sent it in with the application form. A couple of weeks went by and I was invited to attend an interview, which was more than a screening process, and I was offered the job. I was working at Addlestone Police Station at the time and with some reluctance tendered my resignation. I had to work a month's notice, but some of the time was used up as annual leave. It was a sad day when I left, as I'd made a lot of friends in the police service. I'd also gained a tremendous amount of knowledge regarding computer systems and how to interrogate databases, held certificates for Module 1 and Module 2 courses on PNC and IT training, and had been Secretary of the Surrey Police Fly Fishing Team and Chairman of the Clay Target Shooting Team. It seemed really strange walking past Woking Police Station to the railway station to start my first day at work for South West Trains.